Welcome back, grade 5, to your week number 2 of your social studies e-learning experience. I hope you enjoyed last week, learning a little bit about the fur trade forts and the Métis people. Today we're going to kind of switch gears. We're going to learn about something a little bit different, but it greatly impacted the population of Canada and bringing more people into Canada to our great nation. So, without further ado, get your workbooks out, get your highlighters out, and let's get ready to make some highlight notes here. If you need to pause the video at any point, again, do that. Don't make yourself scramble around trying to get the highlights. The video you can pause. It's very easy to work through. Okay, here we go. The Loyalists. Over 200 years ago, the American Revolution shattered the British Empire in North America. So, the American Revolution shattered the British Empire in North America. One result of this conflict had a profound impact on Canadian history. 13 colonies of British North America joined together against the mother country. So 13 colonies of British North America joined together against the mother country. The British felt the colonists should pay taxes to the mother country. So the British, England, felt that the colonists needed to pay taxes to the mother country because they were helping them out. Because the English government was providing services that the colonists would otherwise have to do without. So, England said, you know what? All these people living in British North America, we're helping them out, we're giving them assistance, we're giving them, whether it's food, water, land, shelter, things like that. We're providing these things to them, so they need to start paying taxes and pay us back. Now, continuing. The American colonists felt that the taxes were unfair because they were being imposed by a government in which the colonists had no voice. So, you'll highlight that. The American colonists felt that the taxes were unfair because they were being imposed by a government in which the colonists had no voice. So, the colonists had no input on government decisions because they didn't live in England anymore. They lived in British North America. And then the 13 colonies were New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. So all the way kind of down that east coast of the United States. I'm going to scroll so these highlights will disappear. And here is the map. So kind of all the way down, kind of this area, we had our 13 colonies. So what I want you to do is shade in the 13 states listed above. You can use your highlighter. You can use a pencil to shade in, a pencil crayon. So shade that in now. Pause the video, shade that in, and then we'll move on to the next page to get the rest of your highlights. All right, I'm going to scroll now to the next page. All right, here we go. Not everyone who lived in the 13 colonies opposed Britain. Some people remained faithful to the British Crown. So we're going to highlight that. Some people remained faithful to the British Crown. The people who opposed the American government would come to be known as United Empire Loyalists. Sorry, I almost said Oilists. Loyalists would come to be known as United Empire Loyalists. These people were opposed to the revolution, and they did so by speaking out, spying, or fighting against the rebels. More than 100,000 fled or were driven from their homes and eventually settled in British North America. So you can highlight that. They were scattered on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean in the British Isles, the British Northwest, or the British West Indies, Nova Scotia, and the province of Quebec. So this is where they all had to go to. They all fled their homes because they were loyal to the crown and the colonists were not. The Loyalists who settled in Nova Scotia and Quebec came mostly from the northern colonies. From Boston, where the Revolution began, from New York, which was held throughout the war by the British Army, and from Pennsylvania, where Loyalist settlement was strong and widespread. Nova Scotia and Quebec, between them, received a migration of more than 40,000 Loyalists. Such a migration was foreseen by no one at the beginning of the war. It is not too much to say that it changed the course of Canadian history. So 40,000 of these Empire Loyalists, of the British Empire Loyalists, moved to Nova Scotia and Quebec. So that is quite a big chunk of that original 100,000 who fled. Almost half. I've been highlighting as we've gone, so pay attention. Make sure you get the highlights. Next paragraph. I'll just scroll so it's a little bit easier. During the Revolution, there was a trickle of migration into Canada, of immigration into Canada. When the Revolution ended, the Loyalists who had not already fled were now driven into exile, and they came north to find new homes. So, that is important. When the Revolution ended, the Loyalists who had not already fled were now driven into exile, and they too came north to find new homes. So, Revolution ended, the colonists won, the Loyalists were now exiled. They were sent away. They were forced out. So they came north to find new homes. And the trickle of immigration turned into a rush. So the little bits that were coming turned into a giant amount. Sir Frederick Haldimand, he was the governor of Quebec, was one of the driving forces responsible for the establishment of Loyalist settlements in 3 areas: the north shore of the St. Lawrence River, the Bay of Quinte, and the Niagara Peninsula. When the war ended, the Rideau region was also added. So these 3 areas took on a whole bunch of new citizens of Canada. They were moving from the US. They were forced out into Canada. The British Loyalists and the natives could not stop the American Revolution, but they kept Canada British. So the American Revolution kept Canada British. So highlight that. Their arrival marked the beginning of a predominantly English-speaking population in the future Canada, west of the Quebec border. So, west of Quebec is predominantly English in Canada. Quebec is predominantly French. They had very little in common, except loyalty to the British Crown and their opposition to the Revolution. So, they had very little in common other than they were all loyal to Britain and they did not like the Revolution. So, the next sentence we're going to highlight. The Loyalists were farmers, craftsmen, clerks, clergymen, lawyers, laborers, soldiers, slaves, college graduates, and people who could not even write their own names. So, they came from very different walks of life. They all had different experiences in life. They were all quite different types of people. We're going to continue. Many of the Loyalists arrived in Canada, in Nova Scotia and Quebec, in destitute conditions, so they were not in good shape. Thankfully, the British Crown was very generous with these new immigrants, granting them land, supplying them with 3 years of clothing, tools, and provisions. So, Britain sent these immigrants who moved just into Canada, who just moved into Canada, provisions. They sent them, they gave them land, they supplied them with 3 years of clothing, and they gave them tools and provisions that they needed to survive. So, as we continue, the raw, undeveloped land granted to them by the Crown was to replace the well-developed farms they had lost and left behind following the American Revolution. Okay, so pause here if you don't have all the highlights. I'm going to scroll right now. All right. So the first task for the families was to take their meager supplies to their forest property and build a tiny log shanty, just like this, shown right here, to provide shelter for the first winter. This crude beginning was followed by extreme hardship, great determination and faith in the British institutions as they cleared the land, built a log house, and cultivated the land. So, this whole section here you can highlight. This is important to understand. These people moved, or got basically exiled. They got forced out of their homes, out of their land, out of the farms, to start a new life in Canada. They moved up to Canada. Well, they might not have all moved to Canada, but most of them did. And they needed to start new, so they had to build a small home to survive the winter, and then they needed to then clear the land and make it their own, make it a working land. That is it for today. So we're going to continue on to this page tomorrow for video number 2. So make sure you go to a friend, family member, or someone you know and tell them a little bit about the Loyalists, the American Revolution, and the colonists, and what happened, the events that transpired. So why this made Canada more a stronger nation. Explain to them how that happened. All right? So, video number 2 will come tomorrow in week number 2.